simplifying fractions, and there's actually two parts to doing that. The first one is finding what's called the greatest common factor, and then the second part, we actually reduce those fractions using the greatest common factor. So the first thing we're going to do, GCF, is what we call the greatest common factor. So there's a few different ways that we can do this. The way that I think Mrs. Gottschalk and I like to use is when we just basically list our two numbers. So let's say we've got 10 and 15, and we want to find out what the greatest common factor is of 10 and 15. So a factor is just it's another word for a multiple. So in other words, something that can multiply evenly to go into another number. So for instance, all numbers have a 1 as a factor, because 1 times anything is going to give you that number. So we start out with a 1 and a 10, and then I'm just going to draw a little arrow here to connect them. So 1 times 10 gives us 10. Then we check with a 2. So is there something that 2 can multiply by to give us 10? Of course, that's going to be 5. 3 will not go into 10 evenly. 4 will not go into 10 evenly, and then we're back to a 5 here. So then 5 and 2 go back together, and then we're done for the 10. For 15, we start with a 1 and a 15, and notice that I'm giving myself a little bit of room here, because sometimes we're not sure how many factors are in there. So we got the 1 and the 15. 2 won't work. A 3 will. 3 times 5 gives us 15. 4 won't work, and then we're back to 5 again. Okay, so those are the factors of 10 and 15, and now all we have to do is find the one that is the biggest number that they have in common. So in this case, they both have a 5 in common. Okay, so the greatest common factor of 10 and 15 is 5. Let's try another one. So let's do 20 and 30. So again, we're going to start with a 1 and a 20, 2 and a 10, 3 doesn't work, 4 will work. 4 times 5 gives us 20, and then we're basically back to 5 again. So we got 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. For 30, start with our 1. We got 1 and 30. 2 will work, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 4 doesn't work, and 5 works, so 5 and 6 are actually, those can also multiply to give us 30. So now we have to go back and figure out which one is the biggest. They both have a 2 in common. 4 no, 5 yes. 6 no, 10 yes, and 10 is actually going to be our biggest. So the greatest common factor is 10. Okay, so that's how we find the greatest common factor between two numbers. Now, that number, the greatest common factor, is actually used when we reduce fractions. So what we do with fractions is we find the number that they have in common, and then we reduce those fractions by that number. So take another look here. This reducing fractions using the greatest common factor. So let's say we have a fraction like, let's see here. Let's go with 10 30-seconds. Okay, so we want to know what number both of these can be divided by in order to get this fraction into what's called lowest terms. So to have it where no numbers can divide the top or the bottom number anymore. So we're going to start with finding 10. So we've got 1 and 10, 2 and 5. So those are our factors of 10. And then for 32, we've got 1 and 32, 2 times 16. 3 is not going to work. 4 and 8. 5 won't work, and 6 won't work, and 7 won't work, and so we're back to 8 here. So the biggest number that these two numbers have in common, 10 and 32, we've got a 2 here, and it looks like that's it. So the greatest common factor is 2. Now to reduce my fraction, we just divide the top and the bottom by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 32 divided by 2 is 16. And that is our lowest terms fraction. You can always double check. You want to make sure that whatever the top number is, there's nothing that can divide the top number and the bottom number evenly. So if this were 5/15, for instance, we could divide that one more time because 5 and 15 have a 5 in common. Let's do one more example. Let's see here, 40, 56. So we'll see if we can do this one. So we want to reduce 40, 56. So we do 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 3 does not work, 4 and 10, 5 works, so 5 and 8, 6 isn't going to work, 7 isn't going to work, and then we're back to 8. So those are our factors there. And then for a 56, we've got 1 and 56. 2 is going to work, that's going to be 2 and 28. 3 is not going to work. 4 is going to work, that'll be 4 and 14. 5 is not going to work. 6 will not work. 7 times 8 will get us 56. And then we're back to 8, and then we count up again. So we got 1 and 56, 2 and 28, 4 and 14, and 7 and 8. So once again, we're going to find our biggest number here that they have in common. They got a 2, they have a 4, and it looks like 8 is going to be our biggest. So we divide the top by 8 and the bottom by 8, and that's going to get us 5/7. Okay? So that's how we use the greatest common factor to find, to reduce fractions and get them into lowest terms.